all of my beginning students, they write one script and they want me to, find them an agent and sell their show. I do oil painting. It's a hobby. And I've always been amazed at how much that's like writing. Your first draft is like when you just color wash the canvas so you're not painting on stark white. So I always tell myself when I'm writing a first draft, I'm just getting paint on the canvas. And then I'll go back and make it work. So there's that. But the other thing is, when I finished my first oil painting, I didn't think someone should hang it in a museum.
This is the Act One podcast. I'm your host, James Duke. Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a good review. My guest today is screenwriter Karen Hall. In her career as a screenwriter, producer, and creative consultant, Karen Hall has worked on numerous television series, including MASH, Hill Street Blues, Moonlighting, Roseanne, Grace Under Fire, Northern Exposure, Judging Amy, and The Good Wife, just to name a few. She has received 7 Emmy Award nominations, as well as the Humanitas Prize, the Women in Film Luminos Award, and the Writers Guild of America Award. Her novel, Dark Debts, was a Book of the Month Club main selection when first published in 1996 and was translated into French, German, and Japanese. She rewrote some of that book and re-released it in 2016. Check it out. Karen is a longtime faculty member at Act One and a good friend of the program. She has a lot of great insight that I think you are going to enjoy. Karen Hall, welcome to the Act One podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've been a longtime fan of yours, and we were just chatting just briefly there and talking about you've been a part of the ethos of the Act One community, and so much of, especially in the early days, of shaping the conversation around training and preparing Christians to work in Hollywood. And you've had a very interesting career, and as a screenwriter and a producer. And I'm just excited to talk to you about a lot of your journey and just let people get to know you a little bit. And so let's start, if we can, back a little bit for people to get to know you. Tell us, where did you grow up? And kind of what were the initial inklings that you were going to be a writer, that this was something you wanted to do as a career? You wanted someone to pay you to write. When did that first get birthed inside of you?
I decided at age 6 that I wanted to be a writer and have someone pay me to write, because my first grade teacher was reading Charlotte's Web to us. And I guess she talked to us a little bit about the author. And I thought, wait a minute, you can get paid for making up stories? So, I'm like, I want in on that. And I just had always loved to write from first grade on. And another reason that I became a writer is because I lived in a lovely little town, but that was so boring that I can't even tell you. There was a movie theater when I was young, and my sister and I would go to everything they played. So I think I've seen a lot of Kung Fu movies and Fu Manchu movies. And all of that.
Did you grow up in Georgia?
No, I grew up in South Central Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. That's right. That's right.
Very, very close to the North Carolina border. It's tobacco country for a long time.
When you were writing as a little kid, was it just writing, telling stories, or did you actually think about, because I can only imagine growing up in a small town, thinking about writing movies and television couldn't have been necessarily on your radar?
No, that wasn't on my radar. Really, my sister and I got her into writing too. And because, I wanted somebody to write with, and we were both bored. So we would write a story and, I'd take it to a certain point and then give it to her. and we really were learning to plot because we really wanted to leave the other one stumped. So it's like, let's see you get out of this. So it was really good training. But the earliest stuff we wrote was absolutely, we were writing fan fiction before it was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it started with I had a crush on the captain of the football team, and he had a girlfriend who, I had a girl crush on her. And so my best friend then and I started writing stories about them and passing them back and forth. And it's funny because I later became friends with the cheerleader, and we're still friends. But after that, I was a big fan of the Osmonds. And so then my sister and I started writing Osmond fan fiction. And we have an agreement now, because we both still got some of it. And we have an agreement that whoever dies first has to go to the other person's house and burn it before anybody gets there. But I think we learned a lot doing that.
It's funny. Donny Osmond has no idea what the Hall girls wrote, but
no,
he never will.
No.
He never will.
He won't.
That's funny. So now, did you grow up in a home that was particularly religious? Did you find yourself thinking about the things of God and the nature of God? Because you've gone on to write about those kind of things, and I'm just curious if any of those things were instilled in you early on.
Well, I mean, we were a religious family, but that was just pretty common back then. I have a brother who became a Methodist minister. So, but, I don't remember us sitting around talking about it a lot. It was very incorporated in daily life. It's like we would be talking about something else and throw in some God and Jesus, and it just didn't seem weird. But I always have been just obsessed, and I don't know what to call it, but I've all my life just been just wanting to get closer to God, and it didn't seem to be bothering anybody else, but I just was obsessed with it. I have something, I don't know what it is, and I don't know what to call it, but it's just been an obsession with me all my life, and I just kept trying to figure out how I could get closer. And I remember during high school was during the the time of the Jesus Freaks and the altar calls and Billy Graham. Mm-hmm. And so our pastor would have an altar call, and my deal with God was always, I'm not going to go unless I feel like you're moving me to go. Mm-hmm. And I never did. But all my friends are going, and they're coming back weeping. And I remember one time going into the sanctuary like at night, and there was nobody there but me. And, kneeling at the altar and just telling God, basically, what am I, chopped liver? It's like, you know how I feel. But, I just kept going. I wanted that, but I wasn't going to do it if I didn't feel like I felt moved, because otherwise it just was like a show and I felt like a hypocrite. So I was extremely well behaved in high school.
You were a good girl.
I was a very good girl. In fact, my nickname was Mary because all my friends told me I was the last virgin left. It was during the sexual revolution. But I just, I have always, I read the Bible. I really loved the Bible. And I read it a lot when I was a kid. I had a children's Bible, and I believed it, and that was going to be my deal. So I remember getting into a conversation with people in high school in a government class, and I don't know what we were talking about. I'm talking about, all the stuff that was going on in the world, and I was trying to make myself known. I just said, there's only one Bible, and it hasn't changed. Mm. And I remember I had tears in my eyes and everybody was laughing at me. So here I am all these years later, and I still feel the same way.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you are also a very funny writer. I don't think you would classify yourself as a comedy writer, but you have written comedy, but you're also a very funny writer. There's a lot, there's a lot that you've written that is downright funny. I mean, obviously you wrote for shows like MASH and Moonlighting and other types of shows, but you've done other things too. And so was that a part of growing up? Did you come from a funny household? Did you Did
Yes.
people acknowledge your humor early on? Was that something that
No,
you used
because, everybody else was just as funny. And so
to?
nobody said, Karen, you're funny. But, my father was funny. My mother was funny. My cousins were funny. And kind of when we all got together, we would all tell stories and everyone would try to make everyone laugh. So, there were so many of us, no one thought I was funny.
What was your first? Do you remember what your first professional paid writing gig was?
Yes. I was a senior in high school and I sent a story into some magazine and they bought it and paid me $10. So
wow, that's awesome. You don't remember the magazine?
No, I don't. My first really, really professional thing was I got hired to do a freelance episode of MASH. So that's how I got my writer's guild card.
And you, so I want to get to MASH, but before we get to MASH, that was kind of I don't want to say it was the only way, but that was a very common way, right, for aspiring writers back then, was to submit to periodicals and to magazines and to maybe even newspapers, right? You write letters. To get published in a magazine was kind of the zenith point, wasn't it, for a lot of people, aspiring writers?
It was. It was a big deal. And what happened to me was when I went to college, I got interested in playwriting. And so I spent all of my college time writing plays. There wasn't anywhere really to submit them. And I wasn't thinking about submitting them. I don't know what I was thinking about. I was thinking about I loved writing plays. And then, I always assumed I'd go up to college and meet somebody and get married and he'd go to work and I'd sit home and write whatever I wrote. And about junior year, second semester, I realized that wasn't going to happen. And so I thought, okay, I am actually going to have to feed myself. It was a big shock to me. And so I decided, well, where will they pay you to do this? And the answer was, New York or Los Angeles. And I decided that if I was going to starve to death, I didn't want to also freeze. So I thought, I'm going to go where it's warm. And I wrote my last semester in playwriting. We had a really strict and wonderful playwriting teacher who was my mentor, and he would make us write 3 one-act plays per semester and rewrite each one of them 3 times. Oh. And I've taught screenwriting. You can't make that happen. Yeah. I don't know how he made that happen, but it was perfect training for writing for television, because one thing you have to do is write fast and rewrite fast. And so I got used to doing that. But by my last semester, I'd written so many one-acts. I said, I really am I'm out of one-act ideas. And I said, so I was a huge MASH fan. And I said, what if I took the cast of MASH, those characters, and I'll write a one-act play with them? And he said, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you write a MASH script? And this was long before anybody ever thought of writing a script for something. Mm-hmm. And so I said, how do I do that? And he said, I don't know, but we'll find out. And so he sent me to the library, and I got a lot of radio plays and, scripts from them. And that's kind of how I learned. And then I had, when I was in grad school for 1 year, I loved the show Taxi. So I thought, I'm going to write to them and get them to send me a script so I can look at it and see what the format is. And, back then it was pretty easy to get somebody to do that. And so I had a friend in graduate school who also wanted to write for television. So we wrote a spec Taxi script. And we went to a conference where we met a guy named Burt Metcalf, who was a freelance writer for MASH. And we ended up being friends forever. And asked him, what can we do with this? And he gave us the address of a man named Jim Burrows, who directed Taxi.
Yes.
And so we sent it to Jim Burrows, and God bless him, he called us. We were in Virginia at my friend Miriam's house, and he called us and told us that he really liked the script, that it had thought it had a lot of really good stuff in it, and we should keep going, keep trying to do this. And that was, I tell people these days when, everybody who wants to write comes at you with what they want is, I'll write a script and you'll get me an agent and I'll have a series on the air in a month. That's not how it ever happened or how it happens now, but that gave us a reason to keep going.
Yeah.
So we kept writing spec scripts, and then finally at the end of the year, I decided I was going to move to LA and try to actually make it. My friend Miriam ended up staying back in Virginia for 5 more years, but then she came out. She made it too. We lived a block away from each other in Sierra Madre. So, it all happened. But also a huge part of mine was when I wrote that MASH script, and I was just a huge fan of MASH, I would put signs on the TV on Tuesday, lest anyone else dare think they were going to watch something that night. And I went out with a group from the University of Richmond, did a 2 or 3 week course in LA, and the teachers who taught it were more into televisionist sociology. But they had a lot of people they knew and met with. And so I took that class, and one of the people we met with was Alan Alda. And I started talking, so I'm meeting him, I'm sitting here talking to Alan Alda, and I told him about my playwriting, and I actually had written a one-act play that was being produced in my community theater while I was in LA. So I was telling him about how I was missing my big debut to come here and talk to him. So he told me to send him, something that I'd written. So I went home, I sent him that play, and I think I sent him a couple other things. And he called me on the phone at my sorority house, which, none of my sorority sisters would believe, because one of my sorority sisters answered the phone, and he said that it was Alan Alda calling for me. And she said, yeah, and I'm Bob Redford. And so I'm lucky I ever got to talk to him. But he just kept having me send stuff, and he kept telling me it was good. And then at one point he said, I've talked to my agent, and he really says you have to live out here to be able to break in. And so I said, okay. So I dropped out of grad school after 1 year. Went out there, and I worked for, there was a temporary, like a Kelly Girls thing called Apple One. I don't know if they still have it.
Oh, yes. I think they still might. Wow.
Yeah. And so I went there and I took a typing test, and, I asked them to, when they hired me for jobs, could they please send me to the studios when they had them? So they did that. So I did about 11 months of that. And then I got a phone call from Alan saying that MASH wanted to hire a writer, and it was during the whole ERA push. And so he was not happy that they'd never had a female writer. They'd had a couple of freelance female writers. They'd never had a woman on staff. And so he got me, a chance to go pitch there. And it's funny because the guy who was the executive producer, Burt Metcalf, had at the same time read a script that my agent had sent him and decided he wanted to call me in. So he and Alan used to argue over who had discovered me. I had sent a script in, back when I was in grad school, and got the standard, rejection letter that Bert had signed. So I framed it and put it on my wall in my office, and Bert did not think that was funny. He was explaining to me, and it's like, I know. I love the irony. But anyway, so I ended up getting the job, and I was there for the last 2 years. You
were the first female staff writer on MASH. Yes. And that's such a crazy story that Alan Alda. And who does that? Who goes from grad school or dropping out of grad school to joining the staff of the #1 show on television?
No. And when I was in grad school, one day we were in one of my classes, and we decided we would all go around the table and talk about, where we saw ourselves in 5 years. And I said, well, I want to move to LA, and I want to get some work as a television writer. So I hope in 5 years that I've accomplished that. And one of my friends said, why don't you see yourself writing for MASH in 5 years? And I just cracked up. I'm like, you're out of your mind, you know? And within 5 years, well within 5 years, that's what I was doing.
Wow.
Actually, I tried to turn the job down when it was offered me, because I'd done a freelance for them that I liked and they liked. And then I went and did a show called 8 is Enough for a year.
Yep.
And it got canceled at the end of that year. And that's when MASH was looking for a staff writer. So my agent, they had liked my freelance. And so my agent called them and said, they want to interview you for the staff position. And actually, he told me they had wanted to offer me that. And I told him, I said, I want you to turn it down. And he said, are you out of your mind? And I said, it's MASH. They will fire me in 2 weeks. And he said, if they do fire you in 2 weeks, you'll live off of it forever. And so I said, okay. But he said, I am not going to call MASH and turn down a staff job. Wow. So I ended up, they didn't fire me, and the rest is history.
That's a fantastic story. I think what's interesting about that is a lot of people don't realize this about the town. Obviously, there's just a lot of grossness about this business and about this town. But there's always been this sense of, if you've got the chops, we'll create the room for you. There's always been this sense of, learn from the school of hard knocks. If you show that you're willing to put in the hard work and write, and there is that aspect of the business too. I know of almost every professional writer I know all received a helping hand from an older writer, a more established writer or director or producer or someone. They've all got that chance to go up because someone else said, hey, you've got the stuff.
Yeah, I have a couple of people working now who, I was the one who told them that, and that feels good. The problem with that whole lovely system is that when you turn to be about 45 years old, all bets are off. So, and I wish I'd believed the people who told me that, because what my thinking was, well, we're the baby boomers, nobody can fire all of us. But I was wrong. So, and men can work until they keel over and die, but women, by the time you look like their mother, they don't want you in the room. So it's the truth. They don't want you uglying up their cocktail parties.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because obviously you mentioned the era. How difficult was it being a woman staff writer? How difficult was it what were the challenges you faced that you felt like you had to fight a little bit harder, a little bit, I'm just curious, as someone who lived it, what was the kind of the unique things that you felt like you had to encounter in order to overcome?
Well, one thing, when the Me Too movement started, I just went, are you kidding me? That was my entire career. But not in terms of, I didn't sleep with anybody to get a break, but there was just constant, what they would now call sexual assault verbally. And, one guy used to put a mirror across from me in one of the staff rooms so that he could look up my skirt. So I started wearing jeans after that. Oh. But not even pretending. It was like, wow. So, it was a lot of blatant that stuff. But I got a lot of jobs because it was in an era when they had decided maybe we should have some women writing, since we have a lot of female characters. And so, the MASH job I got because they wanted to put a woman on staff. And I think probably the same was true at Hill Street Blues. I was the first woman, and Moonlighting, I was the first woman. So
You were the first woman on Moonlighting?
Yes.
Wow. I would not, I'd given Sybil, I would. Okay, before we get there, wow. With MASH, the thing that also I think our audience needs to remember, who are listening to this, is television back then was very different from television today in a lot of different ways. But one of the biggest was, if for a show like MASH, the majority of people who owned television sets in the country tuned in to watch MASH. So when there was a show on, there was only so many channels. And so the majority of people would be watching the same thing. Yeah. So culturally, the conversations were more people were talking about, and these shows were bigger. So the numbers that MASH would do, there is nothing that comes even close to a low-rated rerun of MASH back then. Today, because the audience is so fractured, there's so many options today. When you guys were in the room writing MASH, was there a sense, because you're coming on to a successful show, right? You're coming into a show like the last 2 seasons of a big hit TV show. Was there a sense, or was it just kind of like, I'm just in here, I'm curious if there was ever conversation maybe from the other writers. I mean, you had some brilliant Gail Bart and all these guys. Like, I'm curious, was there ever a conversation about what the audience thinks about this show? Or was it just like, no, we're in our room, it's what we want the characters to do. Or was there a conversation about, hey, what's America going to respond to if Hawkeye, if Hawkeye freaks out? I mean, what's that famous episode where Hawkeye has the PTSD? I'm just curious, was there a conversations in the room about what America was thinking about the show? No, there were zero conversations about that. And I really think that's been the downfall of a lot of shows. Mm-hmm. I've just noticed shows that I love. It's after a couple of years, and especially now, because, you can go on the internet and you can read what the fans are saying. And, we got an occasional letter, but we didn't really know what the fans were thinking. And I think it's really hurt television for people to be aware. I love Ted Lasso, and I'm watching the 3rd season with great trepidation, because it's like, are they going to do that? Mm. And shows that did do that. I mean, even as early as when Happy Days, when people started clapping for 15 minutes when Fonzie came in the room. Yes. Not the same show. Yeah. And I think the thing about both MASH and Hill Street Blues were there was nothing except the show. It's like, this is the show, this is what we're doing, these are who the characters are, this is research, and there was nothing about what might the fans like. Of course, it's easier to be like that when there's only 2 other shows you're competing with. Right, exactly. 3 shows on the network. So, and was Gilbert in the room those last 2 seasons with you? Like, did you work with him? No, I only saw him at parties in the last 2 seasons. Wow. Okay. Who was running the show? Burt Metcalf was running the show. Metcalf was, okay. And how involved was Alan Alda on the creative side? Was he involved pretty heavily with the scripts? He was very involved. He really trusted us. That was back in the day when people really respected writers too. So he trusted us for what we would come up with. That was almost all from research they had done. But he would have, he was very involved in that. He'd have ideas for episodes, and he would write episodes, and he would direct episodes. And I had an episode that I had pitched, my first day there, that I wanted to do. And we just kept putting a pin in it because Alan was afraid that it would make Hawkeye look bad. Mm. And I could see in my head how I was going to write it. And I thought, no, it's going to make him look good ultimately. And so we didn't do it the whole first season I was there. And then finally, I guess at the beginning of the last season, Ellen and I, one of the 2 of us, came up with the idea of, let's write it together. And that way, he can make sure we don't do anything that makes Hawkeye look bad. So we wrote it. The show was called Hey, Look Me Over. And it was the season premiere for the last season. And it's the topic I wanted to deal with is, some other woman needs to call Hawkeye on the fact that he only chases the gorgeous nurses.
It's like he's very shallow in terms of, who he wants to carouse with. And we had this woman named Kelly Wallet, she was a Hawaiian woman. Everybody knew her as Nurse Kelly. And she was adorable, but she wasn't somebody who looked like a model,
Right.
And the main nurses he was chasing, one was Rita Wilson, who's Tom Hanks' wife. I don't remember the name of the other one, but she was also really pretty. And so I wanted to do an episode where Kelly calls him on the fact that, he doesn't pay any attention to her. And it ended up being a really good episode. And I think Hawkeye learned something, but he didn't look bad. He just looked like he'd looked for the entire length of the series. This is what he does.
Yeah. It's often been said, good comedy is dramatic and good drama is funny. And obviously a show like MASH, that was the playground in which you guys worked, which you played every episode. I'm curious, how did that, what was the balance there? Just for you as a writer, and any advice that you have for writers, what's the balance between the story versus the joke? Like how to turn a scene on a dime where you've got two characters, doing silly word play, to then all of a sudden, someone's dying and their arms are on their operating table. That was
when you heard the helicopters, that's when it was time to stop joking. But for me, that's what my natural sensibility is. I have a really dark sense of humor, and I liked writing those kind of jokes. But I ended up deciding to be more of a 1-hour drama writer, because the thing about writing comedy is if you come in and you had a bad day the day before, or you don't feel well or whatever, it's like, I don't want to write funny when I don't feel good. So I noticed that I would always put the funny scenes aside until I got the dramatic scenes written. And I just thought, I don't want to spend the rest of my life having to be funny all the time. I remember I had a big, powwow with agents back then, because, I didn't want to be pigeonholed. And I was supposed to just be grateful to be in television and not be thinking about being pigeonholed. And plus, once I'm a comedy writer, it's easy to sell me as a comedy writer.
Right.
So I had a big fight with them. In fact, I left an agency because they advised me against taking the job on Hill Street. And I just thought, I know this is wrong, so we're going to part company.
That's
and Hill Street was one of those shows, it was like MASH. It's like, it's funny when people are funny, and then it's serious when people are serious. And to an extent, Moonlighting was the same way. And that's what I really like writing. I'm not capable of writing something with no humor in it.
It's funny you say that, because I think most people would remember MASH and Moonlighting as comedies, and most people would remember Hill Street Blues as a drama. But you're right. I mean, I watched way too much TV when I was a kid, and I was young, and I was the youngest of four. So I was always having to watch things that were, because it was like whatever my older siblings and my parents were watching. And so I was watching Hill Street Blues. That was one of my dad's favorite shows. And there were episodes that scared me, terrified me. It was, but I remember the humor, and I think that it's curious what you're saying. When people are funny, you write funny for them, and when how do you avoid melodrama? Because television is melodramatic. So where's the balance there between going back and forth between those two things? Or maybe is that the way you avoid melodrama, is to be able to bounce back and forth between those two things?
Yeah, that's a lot of it. I mean, I just don't have any melodramatic tendencies, so it wasn't hard for me. But I would have trouble when I was teaching, if somebody is writing melodrama, I have trouble explaining to them what that means. But usually it just means they're not acting like people act. People might get melodramatic for 5 minutes over something that they get over, but moods and emotions just bounce all over the place all the time. So, to me, that's how to avoid it.
That's good. With MASH, by the way, before we move on, so it's famously known for the final episode being, the number one episode of all time in terms of viewers. And I think that the old story, maybe am I thinking of a different show, but I think it was during the finale of MASH. They had water pressure issues in New York because people were at the same time were running to the bathroom during the commercial break. That. So the majority of toilets were all being flushed at the same time and stuff.
It's terrible.
Yeah, that's what there's. When you guys as a staff, because at that point I'm sure you had, obviously the writing had been done and you had packed up and started moving on to other stuff. But what was that like to get the word back the next couple of days when the ratings came in? Did you guys celebrate? Was there some sort of special thing of wow, we just wrote the biggest thing ever in television history?
No, we didn't know that we'd done that. What we did was we wanted to watch it at the same time as the rest of America because, we knew a lot of people would be watching and it was a big deal. So we reserved the theater at Fox and the whole company sat in there and watched it while America was watching it. And I really liked that. And it's hard to believe, but I have not watched it since then.
Wow.
And, I constantly have people telling me how good it was. I think because we were so close to it, everybody was happy with it. All I could see were things I didn't like about it. So, for instance, our set burned down in the middle of filming it. So we had to write in a fire. And it bothered me because that wasn't organic. It wasn't in the original script. It's like, we just have to do this. That bothered me a lot. If I go back and watch it now, it probably wouldn't bother me at all. But
the set just caught fire? An act was like something?
Yeah, it was not the studio set, but the set out in Malibu where we did the exterior shots.
Wow.
Fire swept through Malibu. So,
Oh, okay. I see.
The camp no longer looked the same.
Wow.
And I don't know what else, but little things that had bothered me about it. I'm just like that. All I can see is what's wrong. And,
did you consider going on to After MASH? Was it called After MASH, the show?
It was, and I didn't because I had already agreed to go to Hill Street. And I really loved Hill Street. I was excited to be going to another show that I really loved.
And that was a fantastic show. I don't know if people realize what a precursor Hill Street was to so much of television, particularly television in the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s, in terms of how it shaped, really influential, wouldn't you say? Really influential in how it shaped hour-long television.
I always make my students watch the pilot of Hill Street and tell them, if this hadn't happened, you wouldn't have streaming right now.
Yeah.
This made it possible for.
Can you explain that? What was it about Hill Street Blues that you think was so influential?
It was, up until then, cop shows had always been pretty formulaic and very pristine. It's like, once Ranko's taken a magazine and gone to the bathroom, that's a different thing than we've seen before. And it was very gritty, and it was really so much closer to what cops actually go through than anything that we'd ever done before. The topics that were tackled and just everything, it just like broke through something to make everything that came after it be able to happen.
And was that Bochco? Did Bochco create the show?
Yes.
And what was it like working with him or for him?
I learned so much from him. I've got great mentors, and he was one of the biggest ones. And I remember, he taught me everything I know about dialogue. And because, most beginning writers, I was just overwriting everything. And one day he called me in his office, and he had my script on the desk, and he said, stand behind me. So I did, and he said, watch this. And he just went through and started striking out words. And that was like a moment that changed my writing life. It's like, oh, wow. And when I teach dialogue, the thing that I try to harp on is don't use any word that you don't have to use. And, go through and strike out it because it makes the dialogue crisp and it makes it just, 100% better. So I learned that from him. I learned a lot of how to put a story together from him. And I remember I just always felt like I wasn't good at it. And he told me, he said, you will learn to write story when you have to. And I thought, okay. And then later when I was running a show, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's like nobody's going to fix this. So
Wow.
I had to learn it.
Wow. And for On Hill Street, you said you were also the only female staff writer on Hill Street Blues?
Yes, I think they had some after I left, but at the time I was.
How long were you on the show?
How long was I on it? I think I was there for 2 seasons.
Okay.
Back then, when you could get a new job anytime you wanted one, 2 seasons was about as long as I got bored after 2 seasons. I wanted to go write something else. That seems.
No, you wouldn't stay. You wouldn't necessarily stay on a show the whole run, would you?
No, it's like I've written this. I want to go write something else. So I left there and I went and wrote a bunch of movies of the week, and then Glenn started being after me to come work on Moonlighting. And I turned him down for a long time because I was not a huge fan of that show. I became a huge fan of it, but I've never written silly stuff. And I didn't think I wanted to write silly stuff. But finally I went, and I actually ended up having a lot of fun writing silly stuff. And then, most of it was not silly. So
now that was a show, for a lot of people who don't know, that was a show that actually had a big, if I remember correctly, you can correct me, but it had a big audience campaign to keep it renewed, because it was kind of always on the bubble, and at least towards the latter years, right? Like there was they used to call them a big write-in campaign, because that was the way, right? People would write letters, so ABC would get flooded. Keep Moonlighting on the air, right? And so the audience maybe wasn't necessarily as large, but it was an intense audience base.
Yeah,
right?
Yes. I left there when I found out Sybil was pregnant, because I said to Glenn, I don't think we have a show anymore. I didn't want them to sleep together. I thought that we didn't have a show after that, and if Gunsmoke could do it for 24 seasons, I didn't know why we couldn't. And because that's what all the, dramatic tension was about. And I still think I'm right about that. But when I found out she was pregnant, I just went, this isn't the show, and I don't want to write it. So I left. My sister took my job. And
oh, really? Barbara took your job?
Yeah, so she got to deal with that.
That's funny. Now, okay, so I'm from Memphis. Just so full disclosure, I'm from Memphis. My mom would tell me old Sybil stories. So I'm just,
really?
To be clear, I already have a little true story, behind the scenes background. I'm curious, especially given the fact that you were the only female writer there for a while. Like, was Sybil a handful? Was that a little made up in the press, or what was it like behind the scenes with her?
Let's just say that there's not much I can say about Sybil without getting myself into trouble.
Did you guys get along, the two of you, or no?
Short answer is yes. She, Sybil wanted to be my best friend, but Sybil had issues with Glenn and Bruce that I did not have. Yeah. And I did not want to team up with her against them. And that was kind of where our conflict was.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bruce Willis, obviously, he kind of came out of nowhere. That show was the show that launched his career. And if I remember correctly, once again, you correct my memory here, but I think you were off the show at this point. But when he came back after Die Hard, that was when it was like suddenly the network wanted him, right? It was everything kind of flipped. And was that really the downfall of the show at that point, when everything started to disintegrate?
I don't know. I was gone by then, but I adore Bruce, but I only had to work with the pre-Die Hard Bruce. My sister got the post-Die Hard Bruce. And I think we have a different take on it. But, when I was working with him, I can't say enough good things about him. And his work ethic was incredible. And he was just great. I loved him.
Yeah, it's sad to see right now what he's going
I
through,
know.
stuff. Yeah. Also, the thing that I think a lot of people don't always remember in this business, unless you're actually working in the business day in and out, is they call them stars for a reason. They have genuine power and control, and the bigger the star, the bigger the power and control. And that's a part of the game, right, Karen, that you have to play in the business.
It is. And I'll tell you, every show that I have created, since then, I have made an ensemble cast for a reason. Because, with the two of them, it's like they just completely had us over a barrel, because you can't have the show without the two of them. Yeah. We did some DePesto episodes. We proved that. And then I went on to do Judging Amy, and I will never again do a show where an actor's name, is part of the title.
It's in the show.
That's stupid. I'll also never do one where an actor is an executive producer. It's just that it just works so much better when the power is distributed better than that.
Speaking of Judging Amy, so that show was created by your sister, right?
Yes. I mean, a version of it was created. There were many versions of it created before it got on the air. So I think Amy and her husband had created a version. I know that John Tinker and whoever he was writing with at the time had done a version. But Barbara did the version that ended up getting on the air. Okay.
And up to before Judging Amy, had you ever been on a staff with your sister, or was this the first time you guys were working together in a room?
No, that was ever since, we wrote stories and traded them off in high school. That was the first time we had ever worked together.
So the only time the last time you guys had worked together was your Osmond fan fiction.
Osmond fan fiction to Judging Amy. And it was funny because, I loved working with Barbara in a lot of ways. The way in which I did not love working with Barbara, which she knows, is that she had to be nicer to everybody else than she did to me, because I'm her sister. So if she got mad at everybody else, she yelled at me. So I didn't like that part. But, I love, we write very, very similarly. I'll find stuff now that we wrote a while ago, and I can't remember who wrote what, because our styles are just so close. Yeah. And so I remember getting notes from Barbara was great, because, I came in and sat down one day and I had a script I needed to do a rewrite on, and we talked in shorthand. And so almost nothing was said, and other writers were sitting in the room, and it's like, when we were done, they thought, you know how to go rewrite this based on what just happened? But, I loved that part of it. And I loved working on the show. It gave you a chance to write, so many different things that I really liked writing. So that was probably my favorite staff job I ever had.
Your career, you've worked with so many great actors. I mean, even with Judging Amy, with Tyne Daly, there are certain roles that some of these actors inhabit that you just like, wow, they own them at a kind of a different level. And I think that show, Tyne Daly, she was that character.
Yeah, she really was.
When you have an actor out, Alan Alda, or obviously Alda, even at a completely different level with Hawkeye, because he was so integral, but Sybil, Bruce, all these guys, when you've got an actor that you're just like, as a writer, do you just want to just throw as much raw meat to them as you can? I'm curious about your process. Do you think, man, I can't wait to hear these guys with these?
Oh, yeah. The thing about them was, because I'd done some work where this wasn't true, but with, the actors that you mentioned, I knew that what I wrote was what I was going to end up seeing in dailies. And that was very exciting, because, I could hear it in my head. I knew how it should be. And then to just go and just enjoy the dailies, because you were getting, what you should get. That was great. And it would be fun to write for both Tyne and Amy, it's like I would write to what I knew they were really good at, and just look forward to seeing it because it just would be great.
So, I think it was around this time, and once again, correct my memory here. I think it was around this time you decided to write a novel called Dark Debts, and I highly recommend everyone who's listening to this to go out and get it. It's fantastic.
But make sure they get the 2016 version and not the 1996 version.
Well, that's the one that I read. You telling me?
But I took a lot of bad words out of the next version because mostly from my mother, who was like 92 at the time, and she wanted to be able to recommend it to her friends. But also, when I wrote the first version, my protagonist is a very liberal Jesuit, and I was, I want to say idiot liberal at the time. And after my conversion experience that came from writing it, I just kept kind of following where God led me. And so there was a lot of stuff in that first version that I just didn't feel good about, leaving out there in the world, like things that the priest was not happy with the church that I have long since come to be happy with. And so what I did in the second version was I added another priest who was a conservative Jesuit who was based on a good friend of mine, so that you could hear both sides of that story.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Maybe I should I'll go back and read the new version. I never read it. Let's talk a little bit about, that's kind of what I wanted to get to is you in the process of writing this book. And like you said, just then some of the characters in the book are priests. You found yourself, like any good writer, you need to go back and do some research because you were raised Methodist. You wanted to. And so this then led to a spiritual awakening in your life. And I'm just curious if you could just kind of unwrap that for our audience. What was that process like? When did you decide to write the book, and what was that process like?
I'll tell you one thing. I have a new book coming out. I don't know when, but I wrote a book for Ignatius Press that is about the conservative Jesuit that I based the new character in the new book on. And so I got to use him to say the things that I now believe. And when I was doing reviews when my editor let me rewrite the first book, he had always wanted to take a book that a writer had written and then wait some years and let them write it again to see how it would change. So when I had a lot of interviews about it and people would ask me, why I felt the need to change it, it was hard to answer that question, because the real answer was because I put a lot of nonsense in that first version and I want to fix it before I go to my grave. So, I made all sorts of things up that meant that. But my conversion experience was, I had been very religious growing up, and then I just hit the point where I'd had it with trying to figure it all out. I went back to the Catholic Church instead of a Protestant church because I really had fallen in love with, what I used to think of as just stylistic things. But, I always wanted something more than to sit on a bench and have somebody lecture me. It's like, so I frequently tell people that I became Catholic because I have ADHD. And it's like, I got to stand up and sit down and kneel and, say some things so I can stay awake. But, in terms of coming back to Christianity, I remember the first, because I'd been gone for 15 years and, I wasn't really giving it any thought. And so when I first got back to church, it's like, my first thought was, wow, they still believe the same archaic stuff they used to. They haven't grown up at all. And so it's like, okay, so not only do I have to do this research, but I've got to convince myself that a character I'm writing is supposed to be really intelligent, would believe all of this. And so when I left, I had a friend who had gone with me, who belonged to the church, and she asked me, would I ever think of coming back? And I was like, well, no, because I know one of the things at the time I was on my high horse about was, women's lib. So, Catholics aren't famous for that. And so then I came back the second week and I just felt extremely nostalgic for the time in my life when I believed all of that stuff. Because it's like, I mean, I really wish I could go back and believe that again. And then after a couple more times, I said to myself, if there's any way on earth I can make myself believe this story again, I'm going to. And then I went home and I had piles of books that, I had bought back when I had, I mean, my mother always says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, which I think, the whole world is a good example of that right now. But I said, I'd see books like, I remember the titles of books would make me think that I was right in not believing in Christianity. So when I finally got to that point, I made myself two piles of books, and one was piles of books of people defending Christianity, and the other was all these New Age books and everything else, and not even New Age, but very liberal books. So I started reading, and about 3 books into the anti-religious stack, I realized that these people, I had a fundamental difference with these people, which is they don't believe in the supernatural. And I grew up in a haunted house, so I knew that there was something going on that I didn't know about. And so that was like a turning point to me. So I went, okay, they don't believe something that I absolutely believe. So I can just push that whole stack aside and read the other books. And I couldn't get to the point, I don't think you really can, where, books had convinced me that it was right. But, Barbara Nicolosi laughs at me because I always tell her that the 4th stage of my conversion was me saying, oh, hell, I believe this. I just, I said, you got to give some credence to, you got to believe something. And so why not believe what you want to believe? But I also felt like I also have to give some credence to the fact that I feel something on the other side of this. If nothing were going on there, I wouldn't feel what I feel. And so I need to give some credence to that. So I did. And then, not too long after that, I joined the church. But even then, I write about this in my new book. I was really what I call I was a Mahoney Catholic, which doesn't have much to do with, a St. Ignatius Catholic. And so, I had to reconvert myself after I converted to just keep going where I felt led. And that took me really back to where I had started with, I believe the Bible. I know that in the year 2023, for me to say, I believe this because it's in the Bible, I might as well be saying, because I saw it written on the clouds as far as the rest of the world thinks. But it's where I am, and it's where I'm going to be.
It's such a beautiful story, the way in which this passion for storytelling leads you back to the greatest story ever told.
Yes.
And the great thing is why I'm encouraging people to read the book. The 2016 version of the book is because the book wrestles. One, it's just a great yarn. So like, if you just want to, I think I read it in 2 sittings. Like I'm remembering years ago. It's a fun, fast-paced, supernatural thriller, and so that's fun. I like those kind of stories. But because it's a novel, you clearly you're having more than just the obvious conversation. These characters are grappling with what real life faith looks like. And that is something that I think to this day, all of us grapple with. What does faith look like when applied in the real world, when we're trying to live it out in the real world? And when you have your characters actually do that instead of, I think this is something that you and I have something in common. This is something that been part of the DNA for Act One since its inception. And that is this idea of Christian cinema or Christian movies or whatever. The label that we give it, everyone knows this now. Everyone knows that we give it that label because it's not good. We give it that label because the characters are written two-dimensionally.
Yes.
the plots never go anywhere. You know how the movie's going to end. 5 minutes into the movie.
Well,
There's
my number one problem is there is no subtext.
And there's no exactly, and there's
that makes
no
me insane.
subtext, and there's no
Everybody
subtext.
says exactly what they're thinking, and everything that they're thinking.
It's like Dragnet. It's like, just state the facts, ma'am. Just the facts, right, ma'am. And there's
the power is in the place where the audience, sees the text and feels the subtext. Because the power of anything is where the audience feels like they get to do some work. It's like, oh, aha, I get what they're trying to say, and that's powerful. But it's the same as show don't tell. It's like if somebody is just going to give you a list of facts, there's no feeling in that.
So how do you, as a screenwriter, and then this is the question I was trying to get to, because with a novel, obviously you're able to kind of go to all kinds of places with this because of the internal dialogue of the characters. But with a screenplay, what is your advice, or even your own struggles with this as a writer? How do you externalize such an internal discussion, and that being faith lived out? Like when someone's trying to quote unquote practice a character who is either faithful or faithless, how do you externalize such an internal aspect to the human nature?
Well, the short answer is that it's really, really, really hard. One of my mantras when I'm teaching is, this is so much harder than you think it is. Yep. So, you have to find something that symbolizes something, and you have to write it in a way that the audience, knows. And same as don't use any words that you don't have to. It's like, not just in a speech, but in entirety. It's like, if you can do this without a word, do it. There's a really good scene, and I really loved the first season of True Detective. And there's a great scene where they go to look at this place where, something bad happened. And there's like maybe 10 words in that scene. Mm-hmm. And it's mostly you watching them discover stuff and feel what it makes them feel, and you understand it. So, but for a writer, it's like, you got to know what those 10 words are, because they need to point you toward, what we're saying and setting up as the subtext. You have to write very economically, and you have to, be skillful in how you write a symbol. Write something that's going to stand for something else. And the biggest thing of all of it is you have to trust the audience. And this is something I harp on with my students too, because they think the audience has to be told every single solitary thing 15 times. So, in the shows that, like Hill Street, when I first started watching it, one of the reasons I loved it is because I could watch it multiple times, because I never got it all the first time. Yep. Because they didn't slow down for the audience. Yep. And I like that. I think that's very powerful.
And if you don't know, and if you genuinely don't know, I've often tried to, like, what is it about so many what we call great television shows that just works at a different level? And one of them is you genuinely don't know what's going to happen next. There's a low grade tension, even if the show. I mean, I'm not even necessarily talking about thriller type shows. I'm just talking about dramas, right? There's a low grade tension. I don't know what this character is going to do next. And they surprise you. And then I want to go down. Okay, let's go down this path. Let's see what happens. Right. And so if it's Tony Soprano, you don't know what's going to happen because he's a psychopath. Or if it's Judging Amy, and you have a mom and a daughter at a crossroads arguing about something really important, you don't know how it's going to get resolved. And that draws you in as an audience member. Right.
Yes, I loved The Sopranos, and I love shows like that where you literally don't know what might happen. Yeah. I've got a show I'm working on now that I'm trying to make that the case. And you have to do things like, one of the things you have to do is, if you're going to kill off a character, you can't write them tentatively before that. You've got to write them like they're going to be there forever. And, they have all these qualities that makes people love them to death, and then kill them. Because I remember in Dark Debts, I had somebody was telling me that, I really got upset when so-and-so died. And I thought, good, because I wanted you to get upset when they died.
Yeah, it's like the old Star Trek red shirts, right? Like they're just there, that they're going to die. They're just there for fodder. And I think Hill Street Blues was actually one of those shows that began to push television in that direction where there were real stakes for the quote unquote main cast, and there were consequences and shocking deaths and things like that. One of the things that we're constantly preaching at Act One, and I know you've done this for years, is when trying to tell a story, don't start with theme, because I think that's like, that's like throwing the, what do you call it? The anchor for your ship over before leaving port.
Yes.
For you as a writer, where do you like to start? Do the ideas come with characters? Is it characters that fascinate you, or is it scenarios? Where do ideas where do you go to get ideas, and how do you sort of develop and foster those ideas?
I used to always start with characters because I was always really good at character and I'm really good at dialogue. But when I start to try to do things on my own, you can have brilliant characters spouting wonderful dialogue for a long time, but you're not getting anywhere. So even when I'm teaching, I always try to decide, am I going to start with plot or am I going to start with character? And I've been leaning a lot more lately into starting with plot, because it's like the blueprint. It's like if you don't know, where this is going and when it's going where, you're just going to be, because I was like this when I first started. I love the sound of voice writing characters, and I could just have them sit and banter and, forever. Then I started, when I was working, I'd get scripts from people who were trying to break in, and I'd go, your characters are lovely, but I just don't want to sit and listen to them talk for 14 pages. I want something to happen. I think one of the things that's been kind of lucky for me as a writer is I get bored really easily. So I'm really aware of, when the audience is going to get bored. And there's so much stuff you just have to do consciously, which I also try to explain to my students. It's like, you got to know that they can't talk for 14 pages. So if you write 14 pages, you got to cut 13 of them, but there's so many things when you're teaching, you just feel like that you're talking in a voice that only dogs can hear. I feel like things I tell them are so simple to do, and they just don't do them.
Yes, that's so true. I love that. Okay, so for an aspiring writer who's listening to this podcast, what do they not understand about plot?
There's a couple of things. One is my mentor always said to me, I won't let you break the rules until you show me that you can follow them. So don't try to write memento. Everybody wants to write, some big, huge thing that's going to change the industry. And no, I start with like Die Hard and Jaws and other things that are really clear 3-act plots, because the thing about that plot diagram is that it works. And so, do that first and then figure out. Like I love the pilot of Breaking Bad, but the stuff that's up front is really, it's from the 3rd act, and so you can do that once you know how to write in a linear way, and that I'm putting 3rd act stuff here. So, a lot of it is just to be conscious of it and to be conscious of following the rules. And if you break the rules, you at least have to know what the rules are, and you have to know exactly what you're doing. So there's that. Another thing I've been telling people lately is I read a quote from John Wells, who said, I wish someone had told me that this was like learning to play an instrument. Because when I teach people, all of my beginning students, they write one script and they want me to, find them an agent and sell their show. And this is another I talk in a voice only dogs can hear. It's like your first script, you are not going to find an agent. You're not going to sell your show. I do oil painting as a hobby, and I've always been amazed at how much that's like writing. So, your first draft is like when you just color wash the canvas, so you're not painting on stark white. So I always tell myself when I'm writing a first draft, I'm just getting paint on the canvas, and then canvas, and then I'll go back and make it work. So there's that. But the other thing is, when I finished my first oil painting, I didn't think someone should hang it in a museum.
Right.
It's good enough that that it's hanging on my wall, but you just have to understand how hard this is to learn, how much it takes work and practice, and I always. Whenever I go somewhere and some beginning writer raises their hand and says, "How do I get an agent?" I always tell them, "You're asking the wrong question." Right. The question is, how do I become as good as a professional writer? Because that's when you will get an agent. There'll be agents killing themselves over you. Yep. But boy, trying to make anybody slow down and do it,
no one likes that answer. No. At Act One, we talk about the 10-year rule. The thought is, if you just teach me how to write it, I've already got the greatest idea in the world.
Right.
So now you're just going to tell me all these, how to format it. Okay, sure, whatever. Now tell me how to sell the script and make all this money. And it's like, I don't even know the world in which you're asking this question, because every professional writer I know has been working have been writing for years, for at least a decade, before anyone would consider buying their stuff. I always tell our Act One students is you have 1,000 bad pages in you.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as you get those 1,000 pages, you got to get those 1,000 bad pages out of you as soon as possible. That's like your first 10 screenplays.
I know. Yeah, I have a producer friend who tells people he'll read their 5th screenplay.
Yes.
I'm not going to read the first 4.
Yep.
And, that's one of the things I've been like in and out of teaching, because I get so frustrated that I can't make anybody hear that. And nobody is interested in, what I wanted to do when I wanted to be a writer is I wanted to become a really good writer.
Yeah.
And when I moved to LA, I said, okay, what's my goal? What do I want to be true about me? And what I told myself was, I want it to be true that if somebody hires me, they know they're going to get a good script. My goal was not, I want to win an Oscar. Yeah. So I talk to people a lot about what are, holy goals and unholy goals. And a lot of beginning writers have unholy goals.
Yep. And have unholy expectations.
Yeah.
Nothing beats a good work ethic.
No,
I'm sorry, but you've got to have this mentality where I'm going to work today. I'm putting on my hard hat and I'm going to put the work in to feed my family. And it doesn't mean that what I'm going to do for the next 8 hours is going to make me famous and make me a lot of money. It just means that I'm just one day closer to getting a little bit better. And that it just takes time. And that's not something that a lot of people want to hear today. They want that kind of that automatic. The truth of the matter is if you read the script for Michael Clayton, you think, oh, this Michael Clayton script is amazing. I can write a script like that. But you can't. It took him years before he wrote that script. It takes time and it takes really hard work.
Yes. And I do tell my students that from what I've seen, it's the people who are willing to work the hardest that will end up being successful. Yeah. And some of them aren't even the best writers, but it's right. They just kill themselves. And when I first started taking playwriting in college, I always talk to myself about, what is my goal and what's accomplishable. And so I thought, well, what I'd love to be is the best playwright in this department. But I have no control over that because I have no control over how much natural talent I have. So I said, okay, I can become the hardest working playwright in this department because I have total control over that. And so that's what I set out to do. And, if you do that, you might end up becoming the best.
That's great. That's really good advice. Karen, this has been fantastic. I think I could talk to you for hours about all this kind of stuff. I know you're working on some stuff now, and we just want to bless you and thank you. Hope everything's as you continue to work and create great stories. We pray that things go well for you. And I just want to thank you for your time. And you've always been such a source of inspiration and challenge to those of us in the business. I just thank you. Thank you for your investment in Act One. Thank you for your investment in the community here. I just want to thank you for all you've done.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed talking to you about all of this. Anytime.
Well, what I like to do is I like to close our podcast by praying for our guests. Would you allow me to pray for you?
Sure.
Heavenly Father, I just come before you, thanking you for my sister Karen, thanking you for her kindness. Thank you for her wisdom and her clarity of thought. God, thank you for just using her in so many different ways over the years, not only in just telling great stories and making people laugh, but in encouraging other writers and inspiring them and teaching them and training them. God, I just pray right now for all of her current endeavors, God, that you would go before her and open whatever doors and give her access to whatever kind of conversations that are being had right now. That God, I pray you'd bless her writing. I pray that you would just inspire her for all that she's writing and working on. And we just thank you for this day. We thank you for this chance to be able to spend time with her, and just pray a blessing upon her life, her marriage, her family, and just pray you'd protect her and watch over her and all that she does. And we pray this in Jesus' name, and your promises we stand. Amen. Thank you for listening to the Act One podcast. Celebrating over 20 years as the premier training program for Christians in Hollywood, Act One is a Christian community of entertainment industry professionals who train and equip storytellers to create works of truth, goodness, and beauty. The Act One program is a division of Master Media International. To financially support the mission of Act One, or to learn more about our programs, visit us online at actoneprogram.com. And to learn more about the work of Master Media, go to mastermedia.com.